Welcome to the very first episode of Limited Principles, your Magic the Gathering podcast on first pick buildarounds and staples of the limited format. And today, our episode 1 topic is going to be the Marvel Superheroes card Super-Adaptoid. Things you should watch for as you build around this card. And because this is a new podcast, what's Limited Principles going to be about? Early in a format like we are right now in Marvel Superheroes, and through the heart of the format, we're going to be talking about your principal picks. You know, you finally get that sweet mythic or rare or uncommon in your pack one, pick one. Now what? A lot of times you've been watching that card or you've played against it a few times and you have a feeling, if you're anything like me, that you don't want to mess it up. You'd like to build the sweetest deck that you possibly could around that card. And then when we get later in a format, and a format has been fairly fully explored, especially a late season or even into spoiler season of a new format, we're going to be talking about the principal staple cards of Limited. I have played Magic since the game began. I was a junior in high school when Magic started as a game, and I played for a while and then took 25 years off, and I came back around the time of New Capenna and got introduced to the limited format, which is what I almost exclusively play now. And one of the things that I found was that I was unfamiliar with a lot of the mechanics that had developed over those 25 years, but also people were throwing card names around that I didn't understand, and they were throwing them around like staple names, basically naming a number of staple cards after like the original version of that card, like a divination or a tormenting voice or something like that. And so a lot of the reasons for this podcast, both of these types of things, the principal picks, pack one, pick one, build arounds, and the staple cards, are things that I've wanted to see from content and would have really helped me as either a new or returning player. And so it's something I'd like to provide for the community. So we'll talk about in those episodes history in the past formats, like when a particular card or effect has been good or bad and why. We'll talk about the principles of playing the card, like typical play patterns for that effect or mechanic. What the veterans call it, like what was the original card name, what set did it come out in, and why do we refer back to that name. And then we'll also talk about any version that's been spoiled for an upcoming set and give some early thoughts based on what we've seen from the history. And lastly, Limited Principles is named because I am a principal. I am a school principal and a teacher. And I'll be very upfront about the fact that I don't pretend to be a pro-level player. I don't pretend to be one of the best players of the game. But I consider myself competent and always looking to improve. And what I hope to provide in this podcast is the ability to teach and to lay things out for people, again, that are new, returning, or even intermediate players that are looking for an additional edge, additional opportunity to improve. Hopefully my years of experience as a teacher, as an educator, will come out in how the information is presented. So let's talk about Super-Adaptoid. It's a flexible, powerful, colorless 2-drop rare from Marvel Superheroes. And here you can see it. Costs 2 colorless mana to cast legendary artifact, creature, robot, villain. Its Super-Adaptoid's power is equal to the number of legendary creatures you control, and because it's legendary, that means it's star 2, power and toughness, and it's going to come out as at least a 1/2 because it's going to count itself. But there are tons of legendary creatures in Marvel Superheroes, so if you have even 1 or 2 other creatures on the board, this is probably a 2/2 or a 3/2 at its base. But the real fun in the card comes in the next block of text. Whenever Super-Adaptoid enters or attacks, choose another target creature. If that creature has haste and Super-Adaptoid doesn't, put a haste counter on Super-Adaptoid, and do the same for flying and first strike and double strike and death touch and indestructible and lifelink and menace and reach and trample and vigilance. All of the common or kind of vanilla-ish keywords, French vanilla keywords anyway. Notably, you don't see things in there like ward or hexproof, so that's something we'll talk about as the episode goes on. But basically, you can think of it as when Super-Adaptoid enters and attacks, it perma-copies a keyword. And it's not just your stuff. It copies it from any creature. Notably, it only copies from creatures, so if you have like an indestructible equipment on the battlefield, it cannot copy from that equipment unless somehow that equipment is made into a creature. But you can copy from your opponent's stuff. And so, what do we care about if we have this card? It's an incredibly powerful card. It's one of the best 2-drops, if not the best 2-drop in the format. Super flexible. What do we care about when we draft this card? Big reason for this episode is that I had a sealed deck in early access for this format, and I ended up with 2 copies of Super-Adaptoid, and okay, now what are we going to do? How are we going to build this? Well, the first thing you want to do is you want to protect this thing. Like, you would like this thing to sit on the battlefield for a very long time. You want it to accumulate as many keywords as possible until it just becomes this monster that is difficult, if not impossible, to deal with. And then you want cards with good keywords. Yes, you can steal from your opponent's keywords, and you're going to be able to do that sometimes, but you'd like to be able to provide reliable ways of getting a number of a variety of different keywords attached to Super-Adaptoid, and especially the most powerful of those keywords. And then you might want ways to bring it back in case your opponent finds ways around your protection. And then you may have artifact and or villain synergies that you care about. It's an artifact creature. It's also a villain. We don't really care that much about the robot creature type here, but artifacts and villains are definitely supported creature types with synergies in Marvel superheroes. And so let's look at some of the ways of protecting it. In order for Super-Adaptoid to adapt, it's got to live, right? And so we have Take Up the Shield in Marvel superheroes, and that's providing you both with protection and with keywords, because it's not just the fact that you're going to have this card to be able to protect Super-Adaptoid, but you're also going to have the card to maybe protect another one of your creatures, and then it's going to have lifelink and indestructible until the end of the turn, and then maybe Super-Adaptoid can steal the lifelink or the indestructible by being cast that turn or by attacking after you've played Take Up the Shield. Super-Adaptoid doesn't care if the creature that it's stealing from has the keyword permanently or temporarily. As long as it's got it, it can steal it. And then the other key white card here is Patriot Shield Wielder at uncommon. The 2-mana 2/2 that you can tap for 2 to give another target creature you control +2/+0 and hexproof until end of turn. Now, hexproof isn't one of the keywords that Super-Adaptoid can steal, but giving Super-Adaptoid hexproof basically protects it against everything else that the indestructible doesn't protect it against. Protects it against creature effects, protects it against the number of different exile spells and oblivion rings and things like that that are in the format. There I go, using a staple word, oblivion ring. For those that are unfamiliar with that card name, we're talking about the effect that is on the card Web Up, the white 3-mana enchantment that exiles target creature until, I actually forget whether it's creature or permanent, but the point is it'll hit Super-Adaptoid and it exiles it until the enchantment leaves the battlefield. So Patriot will protect against those kinds of things, even though those avoid the word indestructible. We also have some protection in blue. It's more limited and situational. Kid Loki can give Super-Adaptoid hexproof, but only if it's gotten a +1/+1 counter this turn. And so you're really only having viable protection, viable repeatable protection, if you pair it with a card that can add counters on a regular basis. Like green has Training Regimen, the 4-mana enchantment that adds a +1/+1 counter to target creature you control at the beginning of combat. But you have to understand too that you're going to have holes. Like that's still only going to give you hexproof on your turn, not on your opponent's turn, and it's only going to give you hexproof on your turn, in the case of Training Regimen, from combat forward. So there's a lot of holes in that situation. And then you also have things like Falcon's Wing Harness, which not only would buff Super-Adaptoid and give it flying if it doesn't have it already, but it also gives it Ward 1. And so it's a very minor protection. But Falcon's Wing Harness does pull double duty because it could be on another creature, give that creature flying, and then that would be a kind of a backdoor way of Super-Adaptoid stealing flying. And then the most broad protection is We Say Thee Nay, the 2-mana instant that counters target spell unless the opponent pays 2 more and makes him pay 4 more if the spell was cast using Teamwork 2. So that's more broad because obviously as a counter spell it's basically anything that can be countered, which is just about everything. Of course it's still situational because you have to have it in your hand at the time that the spell targeting or trying to remove Super-Adaptoid is cast. So you can see that white's protection is stronger than blue's is. Blue has some tools, but they're not as good as white's. Blue does have a bunch of bounce spells, but that's not the defense we're looking for, because if you bounce Super-Adaptoid, then you're resetting all the keywords that it's stolen. So you need to think about these cards like Justice Vance Astrovic, which is currently performing as the top uncommon in the format. Just return 1 non-land, 1 non-token permanent to its owner's hand. It doesn't have flash, but it's capable of bouncing Super-Adaptoid if Super-Adaptoid gets tied up by an enchantment that doesn't exile it, like something like Frozen in Ice that taps Super-Adaptoid down and removes all of its abilities. Well, then you can bounce it back to your hand and then replay it, but then you're resetting everything. Secret Invasion is less bounce and a form of protection. It's a rare, but if Super-Adaptoid is somehow in the battlefield and bound up and restricted somehow, you can enchant a different creature you control, exile Super-Adaptoid, and it's not really exiled permanently. You exile Super-Adaptoid, and then the creature you enchanted with Secret Invasion basically becomes Super-Adaptoid and has Ward 2. So you kind of bring it back to life in the form of another creature and give it protection, and then if they manage to remove that creature and Secret Invasion goes away, then Super-Adaptoid comes back and wouldn't have been bound up by whatever effect it had on it before. Shield Flying Car is flash bounce, so that's better than Justice as far as playing defense. Flash Flying Vehicle, 3/3 crew 1 for 3, 2 and a blue. When the vehicle enters, exile up to 1 target creature you control, return that card to the battlefield under its owner's control at the beginning of the next end step. So it's slow bounce, you could say, but it's got flash. So none of these things are really great defense. I mean, Shield Flying Car has flash, so it can rescue you from like an exile spell or something like that. It's, you know, better than losing the creature. But they also provide good offense and tempo. So when I say we're not looking for these, I'm talking about we're not looking for these to be our primary defensive tools. If you're using them for good offense tempo, these are all good cards. Then the fact that they also play a very minor defensive role for Super-Adaptoid is kind of a bonus. And then lastly, we have this weird black-red kind of bounce-ish effect with Ares, God of War, another rare. 1 black-red for a 4/3. Ares attacks each combat if able, and whenever an attacking creature you control dies, return that card to its owner's hand. So, you know, if Super-Adaptoid dies in the same combat that Ares is attacking in, even if Ares dies in that combat, you'll get Super-Adaptoid back to your hand. And obviously, that's kind of better than regular bounce because you'd rather bounce than die. But again, there's holes in that plan because what happens if Ares happens to be in your hand when Super-Adaptoid dies? Definitely still not as good as the white. So these are good attacking offense tempo tools, but don't think of them as defense for something like Super-Adaptoid in the first place. Black has only one card, but it's good for the purposes we're looking at here. It's cheap, it has flash, and will be available in numbers because it's common. That's Stolen Stark Tech, the one in a black artifact equipment with flash. When it enters, attach it to target creature you control, and that creature gains indestructible until end of turn, and also +1/+0. Equips for 1, so it's cheap to move around, although moving it around just moves around the +1 power. It doesn't move around the indestructible. That's only on ETB. But again, it's kind of pulling double duty because even if you aren't using Stolen Stark Tech to protect Super-Adaptoid, you could just play it on some other creature, give that creature indestructible, even if you're not saving that creature from something. You're just giving it the keyword so that then Super-Adaptoid can steal it when it later attacks that turn, or if you're playing it from your hand and it enters. Again, don't miss the temporary keywords that can be stolen. And then here's how we protect Super-Adaptoid in red. The answer is we don't. I'm unable to find a single card in red that is effective protection for Super-Adaptoid, so we watch the tumbleweed roll across the desert there. And then green, green has good keywords on the cards that can protect Super-Adaptoid, but the protection is questionable. So there's Spider-Man to the rescue, 2 and a white-green hybrid, mana, 3/2, uncommon with flash, has vigilance and reach, 2 nice keywords to steal. And when Spider-Man enters, you may tap him, and when you do, another target non-attacking creature you control gains indestructible until end of turn. Now, please pay attention to the word non-attacking. Do not make the mistake of attacking with Super-Adaptoid and then opponent blocks or otherwise attempts to remove it, and then you try to play Spider-Man to the rescue and you realize you cannot rescue Super-Adaptoid because Super-Adaptoid is attacking. What Spider-Man to the rescue is great for is protecting Super-Adaptoid on your opponent's turn when your Super-Adaptoid will not be attacking, or otherwise any other time during your turn. So the only hole is when it's attacking. It's situational protection, but it affects a lot of the turn cycle. And again, remember, you can always play Spider-Man, give some other creature you have that isn't attacking indestructible, and then have Super-Adaptoid steal it, or copy it. I shouldn't say steal. It doesn't remove the keyword from the creature. It just copies it, permacopies it. And then there's also Super Strength, very minor protection. It gives Super-Adaptoid +4/+4, I mean any creature. Enchant creature, 4 and a green enchantment. And enchanted creature gets +4/+4 and has trample and ward 1. So you could put Super-Adaptoid out of the range of some of the red damage spells, even though red is so far performing as the worst color early in this format. So you're probably seeing those red removal spells less than some of the removal in the other colors. And has trample and ward 1. If you put this on another creature, remember that Super-Adaptoid can permacopy the trample, but cannot copy the ward. So again, it's very minor protection. It's incidental protection, and honestly, this isn't a great card. I mean, you're paying 5 mana for this effect, and it's really easy to get blown out playing this card, whether you're playing it on Super-Adaptoid or not. So the summary here is that white offers the best protection. It's cheap, it's available, like you Take Up the Shield is at common and Patriot Shield Wielder is at uncommon, and it's simple. Each of them costs 2 mana. Patriot takes a little more work, you have to play it, and then you have to get it past Summoning Sickness onto the next turn before it can start tapping and paying 2 to give the +2/+0 and hexproof. But the hexproof is pretty awesome, and the repeatable hexproof is really awesome. The fact that it can be done at instant speed on your turn, on your opponent's turn, whatever. It's cheap, available, and simple. So you get the impression that you'd really like to play white, if at all possible, if you've got a Super-Adaptoid that you're building around. So now let's talk about the keywords that we would like to be playing in our deck to have Super-Adaptoid permacopy from something else. And obviously the best of them available is indestructible because it protects us from a whole ton of things. Best protection is self-protection. And so if it can put it on itself, then you don't need to worry about giving indestructible to it with something like Take With the Shield. So we have Luke Cage. Luke Cage can gain indestructible himself when he attacks alone. So the idea is you have Luke Cage on the battlefield, you attack, and then Luke Cage has indestructible until end of turn, and then you cast Super-Adaptoid during your second main phase. And on ETB you have it steal the indestructible from Luke Cage. Then it kind of comes in a sense, with indestructible. And then there's the Sentry Golden Guardian, which has 3 beautiful keywords: Flying, Vigilance, Indestructible. That's the rare that creates the void for your opponent. It's the 4 mana rare 5/5. When it enters, target opponent creates the void, a legendary 5/5 black horror villain token with flying, indestructible, and attacks each combat if able. So you have 3 keywords, but you have 1 big blocker. Now, granted, the void has to attack each combat if able, so it's only a big blocker for 1 turn. But the annoying thing is you can't like play Sentry with Super-Adaptoid on the board and then attack with Super-Adaptoid and gain the indestructible. I mean, you can, but the point is that your opponent will just be able to block the Super-Adaptoid's attack with the void, which has indestructible, and then it doesn't die. So you kind of lose the opportunity for that combat. So if you're going to use the Sentry for that, again, if you're playing Sentry, you probably want some kind of way, like Web Up or Frozen in Ice or something like that, to remove or otherwise nerf the void token for your opponent. And so if you're already planning on those tools, you just need to realize what some of the timing is with Super-Adaptoid. And then there's Captain Marvel, Earth's Protector, 5 mana 5/4 mythic rare with flash and flying and lifelink and a power-up ability that allows it to put a +1/+1 counter and an indestructible counter on Captain Marvel. And that it's got 3 keywords and it's got flash, and it's 7 mana to get to the point where you can get to the indestructible aspect. So again, it's not like you're not going to play Captain Marvel, but you need to realize that it's going to take you 7 mana before you can get the word indestructible on it for Super-Adaptoid to steal. Green's got some indestructible that it can pass on also. You have Hercules, Prince of Power, 3 mana 3/3, 2 and a green. At uncommon, it doesn't come in with indestructible, but it's got power up for 4 and a green, which means if you have 5 total mana available, you could bring in Hercules, then power it up, give him a +1/+1 counter. He gains 3 keywords until end of turn: Vigilance, Indestructible, and Haste. And then you do that, and then maybe Super-Adaptoid can attack, and it can pick up the indestructible keyword. And then there's Claim the Kingdom, 1 and a green for an uncommon enchantment plan. With landfall, whenever a land you control enters, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control and a plan counter on this enchantment. When the 4th plan counter is put on this enchantment, sacrifice it, and then you can put an indestructible counter on target creature you control. So ideally, you play Super-Adaptoid, and then you play the land that creates the 4th landfall trigger. You sack the enchantment, and then you can put the indestructible counter on Super-Adaptoid, or you can, even better, put the indestructible counter on another creature, and then maybe attack with Super-Adaptoid like the next turn, and gain indestructible, kind of depending on how soon you need the protection. And then probably the next most beneficial keyword is double strike. You could argue in this set that flying is equally important, but you can get flying. You can permacopy flying from a lot of different things. Don't worry about finding creatures where you can, you know, copy the flying. You're going to have some. Your opponent's going to have some, most likely. That's not going to be hard to find. I'm looking at some of the more scarce keywords here. So in white, again, here we keep seeing white, don't we? You have Mockingbird, Ace Agent, 3 and a white for a 2/2 at uncommon that just has double strike. And whenever you cast a spell that targets a creature you control, put a +1/+1 counter on Mockingbird. You may be wanting to, target your Super-Adaptoid with tricks or things like that, which will help, kind of, what's the word? Not synergistic, but when symbiotically, that's a good word for this set anyway, with Spider-Man and Venom and stuff, isn't it? Will allow Super-Adaptoid to kind of symbiotically buff Mockingbird also. But a nice play pattern here is you play Super-Adaptoid, or excuse me, you play Mockingbird in your first main phase with Super-Adaptoid already on the board, and then you attack with Super-Adaptoid and you steal the double strike right away in that combat. That's pretty easy to pull off combination because you're playing Super-Adaptoid presumably on 2 and Mockingbird on 4 if you're curving out. And then there's Black Panther Hope Enduring. That's the back side of King T'Challa, the white, blue, gold mythic rare. The Black Panther side is 4 white, blue for a 3/3 with flash and double strike. Prevent all damage that would be dealt to Black Panther. All the beautiful things. It's sweet, of course, and double strike could be stolen from it by, or permacopied from it by Super-Adaptoid, but it's a mythic, so if you have it, you're obviously playing it. Very few situations in which you wouldn't put it in your deck. Red does make an appearance when we're talking about double strike. Red couldn't protect Super-Adaptoid, but it can give it one of the good keywords here. There's Quicksilver, the single red 1/1 red rare that you can begin the game with him on the battlefield if he's in your opening hand. Quicksilver has haste, and this is one of the rare ways where you could actually have Super-Adaptoid come in on turn 2 with haste, which would allow you to get the ETB trigger and the attack trigger right away on turn 2. Pretty sweet. So, Super-Adaptoid could come in and on ETB copy the haste from Quicksilver, because you play Quicksilver on 1, or it's just on the battlefield at the beginning of the game. And then you play Super-Adaptoid on 2. And then when Super-Adaptoid attacks, it could grab a second keyword from something else, maybe one of your opponent's creatures. And then Quicksilver can power up for 5 to gain a +1/+1 counter and a double strike counter, so later on Super-Adaptoid can steal the double strike, copy the double strike, or if Super-Adaptoid's on the battlefield and then you drop Quicksilver later, then great. And then there's Team Tactics, the 1 in a red instant. Target creature gains double strike until end of turn. And if the spell is cast using Teamwork 1, the creature also gains trample until end of turn. So there's 2 keywords that Super-Adaptoid could copy. It's cheap and it's instant, but the timing is key, because you might often want to surprise your opponent by playing Team Tactics and giving one of your creatures double strike after combat has already begun, after you've declared attackers and they've declared blockers. But you have to remember that Super-Adaptoid is triggering on it attacking. And so the timing might not work out exactly the way that you want. You'd have to play like Team Tactics on one of your other creatures pre-combat, before you, or at least before you declare attackers. But then, you could play it on one of your creatures, and then Super-Adaptoid could copy it, and then you'd have 2 double striking creatures. So it's not a bad effect. It's just got some timing that has to be watched. But do you see the Vision, which is possibly the best rare to pair with Super-Adaptoid, in that sealed pool I was telling you about where I had 2 Super-Adaptoids, I also had 1 copy of the Vision. And there's a reason why that sealed pool went 7 and 2. The Vision, 4 colorless mana for a 2/5 legendary. Vision is just a regular rare, so you're going to have situations where you might get both Super-Adaptoid and the Vision. It has Flying and Vigilance, so you've already got 2 nice keywords on it. And whenever you cast a non-creature spell, choose one that hasn't been chosen this turn. Either Vision gains double strike, or Vision gains indestructible, or draw a card. So it is the rare card, pun intended, that has the ability of gaining both double strike and indestructible, not permanently, but until end of turn. But then that means you have the potential of just casting a non-creature spell, giving it the ability that you want Super-Adaptoid to copy permanently. Now, how can we bring it back? How can we adapt from the dead? And white makes yet another appearance with White Widow Free Agent, 3 and a white for a 2/3 at uncommon. When White Widow enters, choose either to put a +1/+1 counter on each of up to 2 target creatures. Growing Super-Adaptoid is great. Or return target artifact or enchantment card from your graveyard to your hand, so you can bring Super-Adaptoid back if you've lost it earlier. You know, if you play it on 2 and your opponent removes it on their turn 2 or turn 3, then you can play White Widow on turn 4, bring it back, and start the shenanigans all over again. So it's got great utility, because White Widow is obviously just a good card, even if Super-Adaptoid isn't involved. And then there's Night Nurse, Healer of Heroes, another uncommon 1 and a white 2/1 with Flash. It has the lifelink keyword, very nice. You can imagine if Super-Adaptoid has double strike and lifelink, you're a very happy person. Find some trample and you're really in business. When Night Nurse enters, choose target permanent card in your graveyard that was put there from anywhere this turn, return it to your hand. So you can, you know, if your opponent finally gets around all your protection and manages to remove Super-Adaptoid, you can just flash in Night Nurse and get it back. And obviously that can be done on your turn or your opponent's turn. Black has tons of tools for this, as you might expect. Recursion and graveyard retrieval. Decoy Ploy lets you return target villain card from your graveyard to your hand. Super-Adaptoid's a villain. And you can also get a hero card back with Decoy Ploy, so you're not only using it for getting Super-Adaptoid back. Too Evil to Stay Dead returns a creature card in your graveyard with mana value 4 or less, and Super-Adaptoid is mana value 2, so you don't even have to use Teamwork on this card to pull it off. Grim Reaper, Lethal Legionnaire, is the 3 and a black 3/4 creature that when it attacks you may pay 3 and a black again, and when you do, return target creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield tapped and attacking with a finality counter on it. So notably, that surprise, Super-Adaptoid is back, and it doubles Super-Adaptoid's triggers because it'll get the ETB trigger and the attack trigger. It'll steal 2 keywords, or copy 2 keywords, in one fell swoop. And then there's Unliving Legionnaire, the 3 and a black 3/2 flyer. Power up 5 black, return up to 1 target creature from your graveyard to your hand and put two counters on the Legionnaire. It's kind of lame because it gets it back to your hand and then you have to play Adaptoid again. It's not, I mean, Decoy Ploy gets it back to your hand also, but it's such a much cheaper way to do that. Legionnaire is kind of a clunky way to do this, and then you have to replay it, and you're pretty late in the game by this point. You'd like Super-Adaptoid to be on the battlefield early and stick. And there's one more black card that'll do it, which is Thunderbolt's Conspiracy. That's the 3 and a black rare enchantment with Flash. Whenever a villain you control dies, return it to the battlefield under its owner's control with a finality counter on it, and then it also is a hero in addition to everything else. And that card actually plays well with some of the blue bounce stuff we talked about before, because you're only getting the 1 trigger when Super-Adaptoid comes back, and Super-Adaptoid's really cheap to play at 2 mana. So if it comes back with a finality counter, then you can just, if you're also playing blue, you can just play a blue bounce spell, bounce Super-Adaptoid to your hand, and replay it without the finality counter. Kind of a nice combination. And then green has one really nice flexible tool for retrieval. One in a green sorcery called damage control. Choose up to two. Return those cards from your graveyard to your hand, and the choices are artifact, creature, enchantment, or land. And the nice thing about that is you can bring back Super-Adaptoid with the artifact choice, and then literally every other piece of green protection we previously talked about. Spider-Man and Hercules, the creatures, and Super Strength and Claim the Kingdom, the enchantments, are retrievable with a second mode on call damage control. And then there are some trigger shenanigans. Loki, God of Mischief, 1 in a blue 2/1 creature. Whenever at rare, whenever a player or permanent becomes the target of an ability you control, draw a card. This triggers only once each turn, but every time Super-Adaptoid is entering or attacking, um, it's it's it triggers and targets a creature with its ability to take or copy that creature's keyword, which means it's a repeatable way of triggering Loki. So all of a sudden you're copying a keyword, and keep in mind you can copy a keyword you've already copied to pull this off too, to trigger Loki. And now you're copying a keyword with Super-Adaptoid and drawing a card every time you do it, which is well, once a turn, but repeatedly turn after turn. The other card with trigger shenanigans is red, and we've already seen red is probably the color we least want to play with Super-Adaptoid. Fin Fang Foom is the 2 red red 3/5 rare alien dragon villain with flying, 1 keyword. When you cast an instant or sorcery spell that targets an artifact or land, so if you're targeting Super-Adaptoid with your instant or sorcery, copy the spell. You may choose new targets. Put counters on Fin Fang Foom. Um, this is incidental. If you happen to already be in red, which you hope not to be in this kind of deck, then you don't mind playing this card. I mean, you probably don't mind playing it anyway, um, as just a good flyer, but you're more likely to trigger it because you have an artifact that's also a creature. Then there's copy shenanigans. There's actually several ways of copying Super-Adaptoid to avoid the legendary rule, and if your opponent has to deal with one removal of Super-Adaptoid, it's much more annoying to have to do it more than once. Taskmaster, Mercenary Mimic, the 2 blue, black, 3/5 at rare. At the beginning of your first main phase until your next turn, Taskmaster becomes a copy of up to 1 target creature on the battlefield or a creature card in a graveyard. So you can copy Super-Adaptoid even if it's been removed, except his name is Taskmaster Mercenary Mimic, so his name is not Super-Adaptoid, and he's a legendary human mercenary villain creature, but with all the abilities, right? So you can do that at the beginning of your first main phase. You play Taskmaster on 1 turn. Next turn you copy Super-Adaptoid, and then you attack and get the trigger. And Taskmaster starts gaining keywords. Absorbing Man is 1 green blue for a 4/4 at rare. Has the Vigilance keyword. It has another at the beginning of your first main phase. Absorbing Man becomes a copy. Very similar to Taskmaster, except Absorbing Man doesn't copy creatures. Absorbing Man copies artifacts, non-aura enchantments, or lands. But the nice thing is, Super-Adaptoid qualifies for both these cards. So that's another option. But probably my favorite way to do copy shenanigans with Super-Adaptoid is Shuri, Wakandan Inventor, 1 in a blue for a 2/1 at uncommon. So you're going to be able to fairly reliably find this. Artifact spells you cast cost 1 less to cast. I did have a game where I, uh, I cast Shuri on turn 2, and then I cast Super-Adaptoid on 3, and the 1/3 artifact creature that surveils 2 also on turn 3, and I spent 1 mana to use an ability on turn 3. I might have used Shuri's copying ability on the next turn. Anyway, because they are costing 1 now, the 2 mana creatures have been reduced to 1 artifact creatures. But Shuri's ability is 1 tap, target artifact you control becomes a copy of a second target artifact you control until end of turn, except it isn't legendary. So you can turn a treasure token or a clue token or some little stupid 1/1 robot or something into a copy of Super-Adaptoid, which is kind of fun. And the two artifacts I wanted to call to your attention that you might want to increase the value of in your mind when you're drafting, if you have Super-Adaptoid and Shuri, is Vibranium Energy Daggers, the 1-mana equipment, and Captain America's Shield, the 2-mana rare equipment. I mean, Energy Daggers is common, and it's often available on the wheel. But the key thing is that these are both indestructible equipments. They already have the word indestructible, so if you make them a copy of Super-Adaptoid, they're already wearing indestructible. Kind of sweet. And then lastly, of course, you could copy everything. If you have the Mythic Rare Multiversal Incursion, it makes a copy of every non-token creature. It's 7 mana, but it makes a copy of every non-token creature you control, and the creature isn't legendary, so it would effectively copy Super-Adaptoid as well as a lot of other things. And then two other considerations here, cards I think you should be aware of and think about. There's Swordsman's Sharp Scoundrel, 1 and a black 2/2 at uncommon. When another villain you control enters, attach up to 1 target equipment you control to target creature you control. So as you play villains, you could just attach random equipment you have sitting around to Super-Adaptoid. Vibranium Energy Daggers is a great one because its equip cost is 3, but it gives +2/+2. And whenever an equipped creature you control attacks, it connives. So you can use Swordsman to equip stuff to Super-Adaptoid for free. It likes to wear equipment, and then grow it. And this also brings up the point that Super-Adaptoid is one of the best creatures in the format for the whole attacking alone idea. So some of these white and black attacking alone buffers, especially ones that give additional power and toughness or multiple keywords like Black Widow Double Agent, Agent 13 Sharon Carter, Hydra Infiltration, Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., they all play well with Super-Adaptoid because there's a lot of times you're perfectly content just to attack with it. You've probably given it Vigilance at some point, and so you just throw it in there, and it's almost like a removal spell every turn. Your opponent has to kind of chump block it. And then there's Vision Quest, the X blue-red sorcery, search your library and or graveyard, so it's also recursion, for an artifact creature card with mana value X or less, very easy to do with Super-Adaptoid's low cost of 2, and put it onto the battlefield with X additional +1/+1 counters on it, and if X is 4 or greater, it gains haste until end of turn. So it's a good way to go find Super-Adaptoid in your library, if you're kind of building your deck around it, and just splash the red. Playing blue is a decent color to play with Super-Adaptoid, as we've seen. Try to avoid playing the red. So here are some of Super-Adaptoid's friends that we've talked about today, and I'll make the slides available later, and there's a link there to sealeddeck.tech where I've laid out all of these cards. You can play with them, make archetype skeletons out of them if you want, see how they go together, move cards in and out if there are other cards that you've thought of during this episode that I didn't mention. I'll be providing one of these every time I do kind of one of these principal pack one, pick one build-arounds. And so let's talk about our takeaways. You really want to be white, but so do a lot of people. White's doing really well in Marvel Superheroes. The good thing is you don't really care about hero synergies. I mean, unless you have Super-Adaptoid and a bunch of other heroes already in your deck. The point is you don't have to go hunting the hero synergistic cards. So there's a certain degree to which, yeah, there's some overlap with some of the white cards that we've talked about, but some of the white cards are not going to be as fought over as the others. You might be okay picking up some of kind of the table scraps from the other white decks. And remember that you're a Voltron type deck, so draft to avoid dependence on this one card. This is something I have to always remind myself because I'll get a sweet card like Super-Adaptoid and then build my whole deck around it and then pay no attention to the fact that what does my deck do if Super-Adaptoid is not around. So build your deck in a way where a lot of these protection tools and buffing tools can work with more cards than just Super-Adaptoid. Maybe you have one or two other sweet rare creatures that are in your deck. or strong uncommon creatures. Like, watch for those, the creatures that you would like to put some equipment on, or cast Take Up the Shield on, or buff in various other ways that interact well synergistically with some of your other cards' triggers. You're going to have drafted this whole collection of tools that will make Super-Adaptoid better. Try to have 3 or 4 different targets in your deck that maybe Super-Adaptoid's the best of them, but where that kind of collection of protection and buff that you have will work well. Beyond white, I think the more you care about artifacts, the more you want to be blue. There are some good synergies there. And the more you care about villains, the more you would like to be black. And green has some sneaky tools. You can play green, as we've seen. Look for the +1/+1 counter synergies, because we've talked about all the keywords, but once you're giving Super-Adaptoid keywords, you really don't mind it getting bigger and bigger and bigger and becoming more and more of a problem. And green is going to have a lot of creatures that can give Super-Adaptoid trample, and so at that point you'd like it to be as big as possible. And that, friends, is the end of episode 1 of Limited Principles. This episode is coming out on a Monday just because the amount of work and preparation for the very first episode of this and launching this kind of property and all the icons and logos and things took more work and more time than I expected. But I'm planning on new episodes launching every Friday. Should be everywhere that you find your podcasts, Spotify and Apple and Pocket Casts and all the places. For now, if you have comments, I'd love that if you would leave them on YouTube so I can read them in one collected place. And if you want to see more of these episodes, the way you can let me know is just subscribe to the YouTube channel. And the more interest there is there, the more I'll know that people are interested in seeing more of this kind of content. You can reach me on both Twitter and Blue Sky. You see the handles down there. And if you've liked this episode and would like to support its development, you can buy me a coffee using the QR code shown on the screen. Thanks very much for listening and or watching, and we'll see you next time.